Well, joining me today is Adam Crafton, who's based out in the United States. We'll also be hearing from a selection of our dedicated club reporters who are also out on tour as well. Firstly, Adam, look, I mean, we've mentioned quite a few teams. We haven't spoken about Wolves, West Ham, Villa, Bournemouth, and Palace either out in America. I mean, half of the Premier League are pretty much out there at the moment, but there's also an Olympics going on right now. Is news of the friendlies cutting through American media, for instance?
Um, Not really, to be honest. But these events, I think it's interesting, really, when people talk about the growth of football, soccer in the United States, because I think sometimes people think, you have to capture the whole country, right, in one swish, and the whole country at some point is going to be talking about football or the World Cup or whatever. And the reality is you've got over 300 million people in the United States,
Mm.
and all that soccer really needs to do here is sell out, right? That's the fundamental thing that European clubs are trying to do when they visit the United States is sell out a stadium, sell as many tickets as possible, do as much in, sell food, sell drink, hospitality suites. That's kind of the meat and drink of the summer. Now, of course, there is also this kind of long-term play, which marketing departments will talk about, which is way more intangible. And that's about, can you grow, if you, it's really interesting. If you go back to kind of 2000, 2001, when these tours were starting, the biggest clubs in America, from a European point of view, were Man United, Milan, and Juventus. Real Madrid were coming in like fourth, fifth, sixth, and actually quite a way below those top three because at the time, Serie A was so big and Manchester United were coming off the treble. Now, Real Madrid are, I think, pretty much without doubt the most in-demand team when they come over here. When they did the first Clasico outside of Spain for about 3 decades in 2017, and they played that in Miami against Barcelona. Do you know how much the ticket revenue was for that game, Ayo?
Maybe I don't know, 20, 30 million.
Good guess. 30, it was 36.6 million,
Wow, that's a
uh,
lot of money.
right? Just for ticket sales, right? So that's before you get into food and drink. That's before you get
Mm,
into
mm,
all
mm.
the shoulder programming that went around the event because
Mm.
they kind of tried to sell it as a Super Bowl. So if you're trying to understand why do these teams do these trips, there's your answer. The question I think increasingly is there too much of it? Because I think a
Mm.
few years ago we tended to see teams go to the US maybe once every 3 years, once every 2 years. Increasingly, it feels like it's the only place they go, right? Particularly, I think United, Liverpool, maybe not Liverpool, United, Arsenal, Chelsea, have been to the US a lot over the past few years.
Mm.
Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, and there's reasons for that we can go into. But it's been interesting to look at some of the attendances this summer at the games because United v Arsenal in LA at the SoFi Stadium was around
Mm.
62,000. Wasn't a sellout. Wrexham v Chelsea in Levi Stadium was around, I think, 30 to 35,000, so quite a few empty seats. So that's one side of it. The flip side is I know that the Real Madrid Barcelona game that's due to take place here this month, has already done $25 million worth of ticket sales. That Manchester United against Liverpool, which is in a college football stadium, which is a really
Mm.
interesting kind of experiment they're doing in South Carolina, sold the tickets for that sold out faster than the Beyonce concert there 7 years ago, right? So
Insane.
I think promoters are trying to work out like what are the things that work, what are the things that don't, and maybe it's really obvious. You just do big against big, but
Mm.
where that leaves, games like Wolves against West Ham, which, with all due respect, in Jacksonville the other night, it was reasonably well attended. It
Mm.
was hard to tell because it was caught in a huge storm. It was delayed for 2 hours, but it wasn't a sellout in Jacksonville. It wasn't anywhere near that really. So it's kind of an interesting thing in terms of the level of interest and cut through. But I think it's more about cutting through to the locality where it's taking place more than making sure that the Washington Post and the New York Times are talking about West Ham against Wolves in Jacksonville.
Yeah, just wondering how much of this also plays into NBC's big contract as well. They also, I think every year do this sort of Premier League mornings live fan fest. And I think they're going into their 10th year now, which is insane, right? So this kind of gathering of locality and taking the Premier League on tour as well. And NBC have got millions invested in the Premier League. I mean, this has got to be enticing for them as well.
Well, it's billions.
Billions, my fault. Yeah.
It's $450 million per season. It's behind the domestic Premier League contract. It's the biggest contract. That there's no secret that the US is a really important partner now for the Premier League. We see it also with the deals that have been done for the EFL this summer. EFL is going to be there's going to be way more exposure for EFL in the US this coming season because they're going on to CBS Sports, which is the channel, if you don't live in the US, that you may have seen, where you have that studio show with Micah Richards and Jamie Carragher and Thierry Henry doing the Champions League. And they've kind of come to own that space, that global conversation on Champions League nights. And they're going way more strongly into AFL. And the reasons for that are pretty obvious. It's the Wrexham story. It's JJ Watt at Burnley. It's Tom Brady at Birmingham. It's the San Francisco 49ers enterprises owning Leeds United, something like 30 clubs in the EFL having US investment. So, and if you are a club at the moment looking for fresh investment, as for example, I think it's fair to, Wolves, I think would are one of those clubs that will say they're not for, will kind of say they're not for sale, but are looking for investment. So if you're looking for investment, I'm pretty sure they would have been like hosting some investors on their tour of the United States this summer. So when they were in, they've been training at Inter Miami's training base in Fort Lauderdale, on a pitch literally two down from Lionel Messi, and then playing against West Ham and Crystal Palace and also RB Leipzig in Florida. That's where investment is now coming from, because obviously the Russia, you're not going to get a Russian oligarch in the current situation. The sovereign wealth funds seem pretty committed to the clubs they're currently at. And I think a lot of that kind of Far East investment has dried up as well. So increasingly everyone's looking west. And even if you just look at the strength of the American economy relative to the Europe at the moment, I mean, America is producing a lot of billionaires. And that's a lot of potential investors for sport. But football is now, it's not only competing with itself, it's competing with, the guys this summer, TEG, the promotion company that are bringing together Man United against Liverpool, Arsenal v Liverpool, Chelsea v Wrexham, Man United v Real Betis, out here in the States, are also they also did the game where the New Zealand All Blacks played against Fiji in San Diego earlier this summer. They also did India v Pakistan, the T20 World Cup game in New Jersey. The gross revenues from that game, $26 million. The diaspora for cricket fans in New Jersey is now absolutely massive, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around that. So football is having to compete for investment and interest from what, not even the sports we would expect. I mean, you asked about the Olympics at the start, right? There we're talking about rugby and cricket, sports that you don't associate with the United States. And then on top of that, you obviously have NFL, which is just like way, way bigger than everything else. Like football is never going to, soccer is never going to get near what NFL is. 96, I think, of the most 100 watched broadcasts each year in the US are NFL, right? So forget it, right? If people are ever saying to you, soccer's going to explode to the point where it's challenging NFL, no chance. But what it could potentially do over time is get closer to baseball.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
I don't think it'd be as big as NBA, to be honest, certainly in terms of viewing audiences and things like that. But if the country is 330 million,
Yeah.
then you don't need all of them, right? You don't need all of them. At the moment, a good Premier League game on NBC or Peacock, their streaming service, is just over 2 million, right? If you can get that number to, I don't know, 4 million in 10 years' time, then that's a massive, massive change and success. So, and the other bit is just kind of the fashion bit, which I think is starting to develop as well. You see a lot of clubs now bringing out when you think of like that kind of US sporting landscape, a lot of it is fashion as well. And it's I think Peter Kenyon, the former Man United and Chelsea chief executive, used to talk about America and say, there's 330 million people here, and that's 330 million people who will spend money on sport, right? Whether that's
Massive.
tickets or merchandise or whatever.
Mm.
And that's what you see when these teams come here for games that do not matter, right? And in some cases, people being prepared to pay three-figure sums for it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, British musicians have broken into this market. Trying to conquer America is always massive. I think Adele sold maybe 11 million albums in the UK and then goes to America. It's 30 million albums in general. I mean, think of that revenue. Think about all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's move on because let's hear now from one of our club reporters out on tour. James McNicholas is with Arsenal and explains the importance of the link to the USA for Arsenal.
Well, I'm out at the moment in Philadelphia. I've been in Los Angeles with the club as well. Arsenal are here because America has become really their home from home. Of course, they have American owners, Stan Kroenke and KSE, and they consider themselves part of the KSE family. They've got relationships with the other teams within the KSE network. I was at an event the other day with the LA Rams and Arsenal, their coach Sean McVay, chatting and talking with Mikel Arteta as they did a bit of community coaching together. So the relationship is very tight. They share resource, they share expertise across different areas. And actually, Arteta and McVay are part of a kind of network of coaches who share strategy and leadership tips. So it's a very tight relationship indeed. And this is the second successive summer that Arsenal have played a game at the Rams SoFi Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, this is always an interesting one, isn't it, in terms of the amount of American ownership or investment in the Premier League. I mean, they're on home soil right now and showing off their best assets from England, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other bit which I think what James said there is absolutely right. The other bit where these tours have become even more important for clubs across the Premier League is these PSR rules, right? These
Mm,
financial fair play rules, which have meant that the difference between getting within these limits and outside of those limits, and therefore being at risk of the points deductions we've seen for Everton and Nottingham Forest, is really, really tight for a lot of clubs. And these tours can be very, very lucrative because
mm,
it works differently in each case, but often what you might get is a kind of guaranteed sum from
mm.
a promoter that's underwritten. So essentially, the idea is it de-risks the liability for the clubs involved. So, I think a club like Man United will probably make towards 15 million quid out of a
Wow.
US tour. Um, in terms of, the fees they may get for games and the exposure that they'll get out here.
Mm,
So it's a pretty significant thing, when you're looking at the world of, job cuts that they're making at the moment and trying to get, the players that they need in for the next season. So it can be a pretty lucrative world. And it's really interesting kind of being, I mean, last week I was in Florida with Wolves for a few days and and then I was with AC Milan in New York, and I was actually at this kind of rooftop event in
mm.
Chelsea, New York. I'm now just sort of dropping names, showing off.
It's all right, man. Keep
Um,
going, bro. Keep
but
going.
but but it was interesting because I think Milan are probably the most aggressive at the moment in this
Okay.
market, right? In terms of the things they're prepared to do, the access they're prepared to provide to sponsors and potential partners and investors. Their owner, Redbird, Jerry Cardinale, is incredibly well. The fund is incredibly ambitious. They've just done a takeover with Paramount, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening at the moment at that kind of nexus of media, sport, and entertainment, right? Like this week, we got almost an hour with Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Why do we get that? Because he's an advisor to the Milan president,
Mm,
and Milan are really, really keen at the moment to expand their presence in the United States. One of the reasons that Zlatan is involved is that he is almost this stardust that can help drive that interest while they're in the United States. But on top of that, Milan also have, players like Christian Pulisic and Yunus Musa from the US national team. Now, they're selling them predominantly because they're good footballers. But one of the bonuses that you get with that and also the fact that they're also both Puma players who are sponsors of AC Milan as well. So that event, which both those players were at, but they also got, like Rafa Leao down, and they got Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Fikayo Tomori, and you have all these players kind of just mingling on this rooftop. And I think one of the advantages you get with a tour of the US is, particularly when you go to cities like New York and LA, you can kind of be the richest, most powerful, most popular person in the world, biggest diva in the world, but you still want to go to those cities, right? As a young footballer. And therefore the players actually like it, because these tours can sometimes be really draining, really challenging. The travel's a lot. Sometimes you're flying from coast to coast. And I think the clubs have had real difficulties at times in the Far East, in terms of the quality of training pitches or pitches, that some of the weather at times, as well, some of the organisation. There's been concerns over some of the promoters in recent years just not paying the fees, and therefore you're not sure whether you're actually going to get the money you're told. And I think at the moment some of these clubs have a little bit more faith in the American organisation and facilities. Now, the flip side of that is, I was in Jacksonville on Saturday night. It's not the smartest thing in the world to organise a football match in Florida in
this time of year. What's the heat?
Year,
it's
right?
insane heat right now, right?
Well, the heat, but also you get incredible storms.
Yes, of course,
right?
of course.
So the amount of
it's hurricane season, isn't it, or something?
right? So the amount of resting water on the pitch around kickoff time for that game, it was delayed by over 2 hours,
Wow.
and then the game went ahead. So it's not like the US is without challenges, but I think it is a preference at the moment on many levels. So first of all, on the level of owners and investors, and attracting more investors in terms of the television deals, in terms of, I think the head coaches like the facilities, and the players like going to these places. Like if you're a Wolves player and you're training at the same place as Lionel Messi, you don't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to complaining about facilities, right? If it's good enough for Messi, then it's probably good enough, for Mario Lemina, right?
Well, I was just thinking, when you mentioned meeting Zlatan, I was like, that's like name drop number 2 or 3. So it's fair to say these tours do open up the opportunity to rub shoulders with people like Zlatan. I mean, that must be a draw as well, right? That fans can see these legends as well, like him, and also journalists get to connect with people like himself who love to promote themselves as well.
Yeah, and also the level of clubs call it activation, and activation tends to mean just not completely shutting your doors to people. But you talk about sponsorship activations, it basically means turning up and being present. And Man United, when they're in LA, they did an open training session for fans and for media. And you can read, I think, on The Athletic, my colleague Laurie Whitwell, who was out there, did this piece kind of inside Man United's open training session, the things that they were working on, the things that Erik ten Hag was trying to achieve, the drills that Ruud van Nistelrooy, the new assistant coach, was putting the players through. And it's something they don't really do at home, right? With their fans who actually are, you could argue the heartbeat of the club, the ones that pay every single week a lot of money to go to Old Trafford, to travel away. I think it's the sort of thing that clubs should do way more of actually in England, because actually even just giving, like media will always say that they should get more access, right? But actually giving the media a glimpse of that open training, I think gives a lot more understanding. How many times do you watch certain teams and say, God, I'd love to know what they've been doing in training this week.
Yeah.
Right. But I think everyone would have a bit more leeway, humanization, forgiveness, if we'd actually seen a bit of it sometimes. I'm not saying, that, go and publish what their set piece routines are going to be and this is who's going to mark who. But, once every couple of months, would it be so bad, actually to give that glimpse? I know they do it in Germany a lot more. And I think it's, a really useful thing. But you're right. I think one of the other bits is the season is, incredibly serious, right? Once the season starts, everyone takes it really seriously. And actually just being in a different country on tour, games that matter but don't matter, right? They matter in the sense of preparation. If you can't kind of have a bit of fun then and be a bit more relaxed, then you're never going to be right? It's quite like
Mm.
how many times that, when those like Mourinho seasons where it goes wrong or a Conte season where it goes wrong, you could tend to tell from pre-season because the tenor of what he's saying in the media, approach, demeanor, it's all so obvious, right? Like it
Mm.
starts there. And so while I don't think like seasons could be made in pre-season, I think it can be very clear if it's going to go wrong. I think there was one with Thomas Tuchel and Chelsea a couple of years ago where they were like, would they lose like 4-0 against Arsenal or something? And then, within a few weeks he was out. So you can do some damage in these games. And sorry, just to finish this point, when these games in the US were first starting, when Barcelona were first coming here, there's a promoter called Charlie Stilitano, who's this huge character that we've actually got a piece about this week, and the coaches love him. People like Ferguson, Mourinho, and Carlo Ancelotti. But Frank Rijkaard, who was the Barcelona manager at the time, called Charlie and said, "This tournament you're doing in the States, we're
Mm.
not coming." And Charlie was like, what? Like he'd known him from his days at Milan. Like, why? Like, other clubs are coming. We've got United, Juventus. And he said, Charlie, you've got me up against Milan, Manchester United, Juventus, Real Madrid. I'm going to get fired before the season starts, right? And that was kind of the mindset and the mentality that
Yeah.
you couldn't take the risk of playing against these big rivals because historically you would play a lot weaker teams. And actually, for a long time, the Clásico didn't happen until 2017. Madrid and Barca didn't want to, you could say, cheapen or devalue it. What is the most exclusive event in the world in some ways in the sport, and also just didn't want to play their rivals before the season started. United and Liverpool, I think, have only very recently started doing that, but now they do it. They seem to do it almost every summer, and I think they've realized actually that it doesn't really devalue it because you know, people will still want to watch it when it comes around in the season because the stakes of the season mean that they do. And at the same time, you can make a shit ton of money by
Mm.
bringing it out here and giving that access to, a fan base that wakes up at, if they're East Coast, they'll wake up at 7 in the morning for a midday kickoff or 4 in the morning if it's West Coast.
Yeah, just one quick one before we move on. You mentioned AC Milan, you mentioned Pulisic, and I know, there is growing interest when USA men's national team players are playing for European teams, right? That's the whole point, right? That you've got these homegrown kids that are now go abroad and they can compete with the highest at that level. But how easy is it to convert US fans to supporting a team like AC Milan only, as opposed to supporting Pulisic, who's the US men's national team star? Do you know what I mean? Because he could go off to, he was at Chelsea, he was at Dortmund, and you can sort of see them following their favorite guy, but then Chelsea don't retain those fans.
Yeah. And it's something I spoke to Milan's commercial director about recently. And I was making this point. I was saying, you bring someone in like Pulisic, and I think he was saying that the amount of I think almost immediately the US became the second biggest source, excuse me, of merchandise revenue. It was up something like 200, 300%. I don't know what the base was for that
Mm,
kind of percentage rise
mm.
I suppose to caveat it slightly. Um, but yeah, like, do you retain that fan? And I think that's why when you do have a player of interest who is there, then it's a bit like, okay, what are we going to do to maximize this moment, right? To connect with this fan
Mm.
and really activate their interest beyond just Pulisic's here, right? So you can use, I suppose, Pulisic as the gateway drug to AC Milan, but then you've got to do a load of things around it, and it's not easy. Like yesterday, so Red Bull Leipzig are in New York at the moment, and their new kind of technical director for all of the Red Bull clubs is Mario Gomez, the former Bayern Munich striker, and he was saying that, yeah, because I was talking to him about in the past, you know, there's been quite a lot of hostility towards Red Bull in Germany, right? They're seen as this kind of fizzy drinks
Mm,
group
mm,
that,
mm.
when you compare it to other ownership models in Germany, it's not pure and all of this kind of thing. And he was saying, well, some people want football to be like it was 30 years ago, 60 years ago. and it's changing all the time, and we have to keep up with that. And one of the big things that he mentioned was this idea that, a club can own the rights to a player, pay a player, but it doesn't necessarily mean the fan is loyal to the club. It means that they are loyal to the fan. And that's something, I think we see it a lot in basketball, right? As well. People jump from one team to another team to another team. If you're not rooted in some way in the team, then the team has to work really, really hard to retain you.
So the big question, is the Premier League going to head overseas with competitive action? Before we answer that, here's some thoughts from fans in LA at the Manchester United Arsenal game.
Yes, it would be sweet as a supporter here in the States, but if I was a player and somebody associated with the club, now that'd be horrible.
That would be a dream of mine. I would love it. Just the accessibility would be super nice, and seeing the boys week in, week out on the TV is just not enough for me, I would love to see them boots on the ground over here.
I don't like the sound of it, honestly. Yeah, because I feel like it kind of takes away of the whole going to Europe and just like feeling part of the history of it all.
What is it about English football that sort of separates itself from the rest of the pack?
I think the history, the passion. Football, American football, NFL fans, you see how passionate they are. But the slowly the MLS fans are getting their pockets. But nothing beats like watching a game at Old Trafford and seeing the Stretford End. Nothing beats that. Yeah. Or even like Liverpool, Anfield, or Emirates, or I'm Korean, so I love Son, and you see the fans at Tottenham. Like there's nothing like it here.
I think it's the culture, just the passion, the fans. Like I've never been to a sporting event with people more excited about their team.
That's quite an interesting one because we're hearing from the supporters, and it doesn't seem like it's something they're really pushing for, Adam. But commercially, for these clubs with American owners, you can imagine why this could be really fascinating. But, John Miller, the exec from NBC, said recently that he could see it happening. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, only recently said, perhaps this is something we could see in the future. I mean, you can understand on a commercial level why this would make sense.
Yeah, and Sadiq Khan got a lot of criticism for it, but I completely understand politically why he said it, right? If he was to say, given that London, gets Major League Baseball coming, NBA, I think NBA's played there, maybe not. Obviously, NFL games have played there. They want to do another Olympics there. If you then say, "Oh yeah, but you can't take our thing, but we're going to keep taking your thing," it doesn't sound great, right? So I don't know what Sadiq's kind of real personal view on it is, but I understand politically, optically, why he would say that. Sorry, I now just sound like I'm spinning for Sadiq Khan. But
I didn't say it. Go on.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
Commercially, does it make sense?
Yeah. Commercially.
Just drop the phone to Sadiq, Adam. It's fine. Don't worry about it. He's not listening.
No, commercially, I think, of course, it makes sense. I mean, the prices you can charge for sports events in the US compared to in the UK are chalk and cheese. And one of the interesting things actually that kind of venues and owners do here compared to in the UK, maybe more in the UK, is like they don't really drop the prices that much, right? So like they'd almost rather have a 3/4 full stadium, but people paying top dollar and that kind of pricing bracket being protected and respected, rather than kind of dropping prices to fill and sell out, which is quite an interesting strategy. Would a Man United versus Liverpool Premier League game, create a huge amount of revenue here? Of course it would, right? Like there's no challenge there really. Would a West Ham v Wolves game do the same? Probably not. But then you just go and be smart about, I suppose, the fixture list that you drew up, right? You've got 6 teams, I think, that could sell out stadiums, Man United, Man City, Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, right? So that is 6, definitely. And what you don't do is you don't put them against each other. If you were to do a round of fixtures here, you put them against other teams. So therefore you bring the audience that is attracted maybe to the big team, but you're also introducing them to the smaller team.
Yeah, for sure.
The question is, does it make sense in terms of, I suppose ethically,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was
The
going to ask.
right.
What does that stand with ethics, right?
Is it morally right? I know for sure that there are clubs in the EFL as well. Not, we're talking about the Premier League, but the EFL would love to take some games here. You don't think Wrexham would like to one day play a game here? Ryan Reynolds has said it's not in their plans, but I'm sure they would.
But also, doesn't Tom Brady have a bit of a stake in Birmingham City as well? Same league, right? Think about that.
JJ Watt, Burnley, Leeds. I know that Leeds would be absolutely open to that as well. So, the desire in the audience would be there. And there is this counter argument. The instincts, I think, of a lot of kind of supporters back home in the UK is always to feel like the sport is being taken away, right? If you go back from, I suppose, almost from the moment the Premier League was founded, if you look at, the way that ticket prices have gone up, the way that atmospheres have changed in stadiums, the way that TV kickoff times have changed, that feeling of the fan losing control and losing connection with their club, when you just look at the way the money has spiraled and all of those kind of arguments that I think are pretty fair, also a little bit populist at certain times. I think sometimes clubs get criticised for stuff that is, on the one hand, fans want their teams to sign the best players. On the other hand, when clubs try and do things to help them raise revenue to do that, it's like, oh my God, you can't do that. It's devaluing the club. It's tacky, right? You can't have your cake and eat it in that way. So those are the arguments. I think some fans in the US would say, why am I less of a fan? Because if I'm in Santa Monica on the west coast of the United States and I'm waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch my team, why is that different to, I don't know, Tom and Dave in Newcastle who are driving down to London for a game on a Saturday, right? They're both hugely committed to their team, hugely invested. Would it be so bad? One game. I think the fear is always, is it a slippery slope, right? If you do a round of games in the US, you're then going to do one in Saudi, you're going to do one in China, you're going to do one, does it become like NBA? Or does it just become a round of fixtures each year? I mean, that was the original idea that the Premier League had all those years ago. I think for sure La Liga will do it. Spanish La Liga are going to do this, right? Now that FIFA appear to be relaxing their rules. Then I think you'll see. It's interesting. I think the Italian Serie A will do it. In the interview we did with Zlatan Ibrahimovic this week, he was saying he thinks that there's room for experimentation with the kind of the Coppa Italia or the Super Cup. But he actually said that the domestic league should remain in the domestic country. And we should embed that clip.
You want Serie A to grow, and that you bring competitive games. Obviously, you're the strongest in your home field. So, but you don't want to bring the league out of the country. That would be strange. I think when it comes to abroad, you have the World Cup, you have the European. I think you can play with the Super Copa a little bit because it's like the format now is 2 games. Yeah. Just to make it more excited, that you can play a little bit. But when it comes to the leagues, the country is where you play.
Yeah.
So you don't mix that. It would be strange.
But I think owners and players and fans, print media, broadcast media, all these different stakeholders, of which print and digital media is definitely not on the same level as broadcasters or players or owners. I think have very different perspectives on all of this. And I would just say from the many conversations I've had in the US since I got here, I have no doubt at all that many, many owners would love to do this, that the key broadcasters would love to do this. I think La Liga will be the first mover. Serie A will come. UEFA will do it in some way, whether it's through the Super Cup, potentially Champions League over time as well. And then once that has been sufficiently normalized, then and only then do I see English football perhaps going that way. I think in Bundesliga, I think there'd be riots if they tried to do it, certainly at this stage, right? So it's an interesting discussion. I don't think it's imminent at all from an English football point of view.
Okay, well, let's go back to these preseason tours of America. I'm just thinking how beneficial they are, especially from a competitive and sporting perspective. I know you mentioned the Thomas Tuchel thing with Chelsea and how that season unraveled, but does it offer the likes of Tottenham, Newcastle that opportunity to prepare for the season at hand?
Yeah, you're. It's just pre-season has never really changed. The idea is you're getting your players fitter for a new campaign. I spent 2 or 3 days last week with Wolves behind the scenes, and it really is amazing, like the level of detail and science that goes into every single aspect of the preparation, right? From the moment the season finishes until pre-season, the way that they monitor their players' fitness, that often players will be given, the kind of GPS devices to continue to monitor things if they're doing exercise, so they know. Because one of the risks actually in the postseason, God, I've started talking like Americans.
You've said soccer at least 10 times. It's all good. I get it.
Soccer 10 times postseason. One of the risks at the end of the season is players actually don't stop. And I don't mean in terms of international tournaments. Often they'll go and they'll have their own personal trainers, right? External from a club. And then you don't know what they're doing, right? So clubs now are increasingly trying to get a grip of this and work with any kind of personal trainers that are working with players in between seasons. And then they come back and, Wolves, for example, when on their 12-day trip at the US, they brought their head chef out here. They've got their nutritionist out here. They've got a head of operations. They've got what else do they have? They brought Uno Flip. That's been a pretty big part of their preseason, that card game. But they've also the sports scientists in terms of how closely they need to work with the head coach in terms of even just telling Gary O'Neill, the head coach, this player's levels when we tested them this morning are slightly lower than we thought they may be. Therefore, let's take him out of training 10 minutes from the end. On the game on Saturday, we were hoping maybe he could play 60 minutes. If it's possible, can he play 45, right? And it's that kind of constant balance and conversation. The players every day will do a kind of subjective survey monitoring, how did you sleep last night? Is there any soreness? Is there any stiffness? Sometimes there's things that won't show up in objective testing, but will show up, when someone just asks you, how do you feel, right? And you put a smiley face or a non-smiley face or whatever. And it just gives a constant sense of how the players are. They have their psychologist out here on tour. So yeah, from a physical fitness point of view, I think the coaches like it, the players like it. You mentioned about the heat. Yeah, for sure, the heat's an issue. But I think actually in pre-season, you almost want players, I'm saying because this is what they told me, rather than me saying it, you almost want players to be pushed, right? And to be overexerting in a healthy way in order to reach their maximum fitness level as quickly as they can for the new season. Because the other challenge you have is players are coming back at different times. So you have some players who will have a full preseason, some players coming back from the Euros and Copa America, other players who are coming back with an injury, some players who sign in the middle of the summer and join you very late. So if you're Gary O'Neill and you're trying to work on a new tactical setup for the new season, and I think he'd like to play more often with a 4 at the back and be slightly more aggressive than his team were at times last season. If you're trying to instill those tactical principles when you're getting players into your squad at different times, it's a really complicated thing to get your ideas across. And I suppose those are some of the things that we as fans and media don't necessarily appreciate when everyone turns up on day one of the new season and the team has a bad result or things don't go to plan and we just say, what the hell have they been doing all summer, right?
All right. Well, the debate over how to balance the commercial needs against preparing for the new season is a key part of any pre-season. So let's hear from a selection of our club writers on how their respective clubs are trying to find a compromise.
I'm outside the Wallace Annenberg Stadium at the UCLA where Manchester United's players are going through their morning training session under Erik ten Hag. Are they out here for the warm weather? That's obviously beneficial, but the main reason is clearly the commercial impact. I think if Erik ten Hag had his own way, they'd be close to home in Europe and going through the the strategies that he wants to implement in his team without all the travel, although they have tweaked it this summer from last season where they flew more. They went to Houston in the middle of the tour as well, whereas here they're going from West Coast to East Coast.
Well, more than half of the Premier League came to the United States this summer, so I guess it was inevitable that City would. Last year City went to Tokyo and Seoul and they've made $20 million from the tour. Over here, I mean, it's not quite as manic, but if you walk around New York with that many people in New York on a Saturday afternoon, it's quite an achievement to see a lot of City shirts, as there were before the game against AC Milan. It's obviously something they've been working towards with the New York City MLS expansion 10 years ago. They're getting their own stadium that's going to be built in 3 years. I went out to the training ground there. It's a replica of the one in Manchester. You know, these are routes they have been laying down.
This is a really key market for Liverpool. They've got 24 million fans in the United States. They sell more kits in the States than they do anywhere outside of the UK. And then when you throw into the mix, over 50% of Liverpool's commercial partners have their headquarters here in the States. You know, you think of some of the deals they've signed in the last couple of years with UPS, Google Pixel, Orion, Peloton, you know, these blue chip brands who see Liverpool's global fan base as a great way to spread their wider appeal.
Something pricked my ear that Laurie said, Adam, in terms of, you know, Erik ten Hag probably preferring to be in Europe. And you can understand why that might be, Riley, really. You know, it could be quite beneficial for his team to have that much more control closer to home to do that. Think about Arne Slot, who's about to take over his first season after Jurgen Klopp, having a bit more control. I mean, surely you just don't want to deal with all this marketing nonsense that you have to deal with and actual focus on pure training.
Yeah, but if they genuinely feel like that, they shouldn't be managing those clubs, because that you know you can't be because at the same time Erik ten Hag will be asking for a new striker or a new winger right in 2 weeks' time, and if Man United are going to make 20 million out of this tour, then I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, it's, you know, and you know, with all due respect, I mean, they're going to, where they've been, LA, Philadelphia, and South Carolina, you know, one of the best university facilities in the world at South Carolina. You know, it's not like they're being asked to go to terrible places and locations. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not ideal. It's not, you know, with the traveling west coast to coast, it's not easy. But that's kind of the modern world now, you know. Milan's commercial director, Michael Oertel, I was talking to this week and saying, I said to him, you know, do you have any anxiety from a commercial person's point of view that, you know, you might upset the playing side or the coaching side? And he said, you know, of course, it's something we think about. You know, we want to make money, but we don't want to disrupt the playing side, because ultimately, if you're successful from the playing side, it goes hand in hand with driving commercial success. But he actually said that, you know, Ibrahimovic, as the advisor to the Milan ownership, said to them, no, we should go because we should be playing against great teams in pre-season. And we should be playing in front of big crowds, and our young players should be exposed to, you know, the challenges of traveling, because it's going to be part of their careers, and it's part of being a top level footballer. And also, players would also complain, by the way, if they had to be just at a training ground for 2 months to warm up for the season. They'd say they're bored, right? You know, they'd say that they'd see other clubs flying around the world and complain. So you can't really win on that. And it would be pretty ridiculous, right? You know, I mean, the genie is out of the bottle when it comes to pre-season tours. And, you know, look, Real Madrid have been doing these pre-season tours for years. They manage to win the Champions League every year, don't they? And Man City managed to be absolutely brilliant most years as well. I think there's a bigger question about the end of season tours. You know, I think that's a far more legitimate question. You know, that one that kind of Newcastle and Spurs did.
And Spurs did in Australia, was it? Yeah.
And then you also at the same time have the Premier League suing FIFA because of the Club World Cup. I mean, okay, well, it's kind of make your mind up time here to a certain extent in terms of, you know, that time management for your players and the calendar for players. But that's kind of different discussion. So yeah, is the commercial always a challenge? Of course it is, and it's a challenge every day on these tours, because, you know, a flight can be delayed a couple of hours, and then you've got an event set up at the next city where you might be, I don't know, greeting some fans or doing some sort of training session with kids, and you'll get the football side being like, look, they've been delayed for 2 hours in an airport. The flight didn't take off on time. We've got to have dinner by like 7:30. We've got this small window. They're not going. And then you'll get the commercial side being like, we won't get our money if you don't do, right? And so those are tensions that play out every single day on tour. I think the other interesting thing is what Sam said about definitely the decent amount of Man City shirts you see in New York. That's certainly true. I think what you can still have as a European football team is also a degree of anonymity when you come to the States that you don't necessarily have in parts of the Far East and Asia. You know, we spoke to Sir Alex Ferguson last week, and he was talking about being in Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania when he first went on one of these tours in 2003, 2004. And he said the team were just wandering around and no one knew who the hell they were. And you compare that to what it was like if you went to Seoul in Korea or Bangkok in Thailand, where people are literally kind of running across hotel lobbies to get a slice of you. You know, Roy Keane could go to a Bob Dylan concert in LA on that tour with a group of teammates, and they would just blend in. No one would even know who they were. So I think that anonymity is still possible. It's getting harder. You know, if you are Erling Haaland or Mbappe,
it might be different,
or Messi or Ronaldo, of course it's different. But I think for a lot of the players, particularly a lot of Man United and Liverpool players and Chelsea players, unless you're walking around in full kit, as many of them seem to do on tour, to be fair, it's pretty.
No one's going to know who you are.
Yeah, I mean the other bit that's interesting.
Scott Carson ain't going to get pointed out, is he?
No, the incredibly trophy laden Scott Carson. But the other bit that is quite fun and interesting is how often players will be given a night out on these pre-season tours, which again, the anonymity is useful. And it was actually a funny thing when I was with Wolves. I said to their security guy, I was like, "Oh, do you guys go along with them, or do you leave them?" And he was like, "No, we go along for their safety, right? It's not about keeping an eye on them, but they all have to put their kind of location pin into a WhatsApp group so that the club know exactly where they are if anything was to happen or whatever." I presume over the years, some of these nights out for different clubs on tour have gone
massive.
Very, very, very wrong. So
I mean, these are young lads. Come on, man. What do you expect, right?
Exactly. So,
okay, finally, as we wrap up, this is quite a loaded question, really. Do we think that the Premier League needs to, I guess, become more global? I mean, it's already incredibly global, but I guess what I'm alluding to is that if this is to be the global sport, football, and the Premier League is to be totally global, then should it also consider where it's played as well in terms of competitive matches?
I think it will consider that. Owners are always considering that. I think it's pretty global, to be honest. You could get into a taxi in most countries in the world, and if you say Liverpool or Manchester United or Arsenal, people will know what you're talking about. So in terms of global awareness, it's pretty global. Not sure if you want to go kind of intergalactic and see how we fare on Mars or the moon, but on planet Earth, the Premier League is massive. And does it need to drive more revenue? Not really. When you look at their TV revenues compared to Serie A and La Liga and Liga and Bundesliga, they would kill for the TV revenue that a club like Nottingham Forest or Everton, or I'm going to offend Everton by comparing them to Nottingham Forest and offend Nottingham Forest by comparing them to Wolves and whatever. But that kind of level of team, kind of mid-table Premier League team, gets compared to AC Milan or Juventus or Barcelona through domestic TV deals. I mean, it's incredible. So it's only through some people would call it greed. Other people would say a desire to be really competitive at the top of the Premier League in a world where you have, owners like the Man City owners and the Newcastle owners and all of this kind of thing. So that desire to kind of remain really, really competitive at the top of the league is the only thing that can continue to drive it. And also, somehow a lot of these owners continue to lose money, right? Running these clubs, not many of them make money. So, I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation for owners to want to make money out of a business, right? Like, there's no other walk of life where we would say we want you to go into a business and only lose money. We'd be like, that's ridiculous, right? But with football clubs, we seem to want them to do that. So, either the spending has to become more restricted and more sensible, or you'll see continued different adventures where people try and unlock new revenue streams. We've seen that in different ways, whether it was, LED advertising, or whether it was the kind of flirtation with NFTs and crypto. Anytime something new comes along, which can be a quick cash grab, that's why, these preseason tours are appealing partly for that reason, as well as growing long term. Then you're going to see owners dive headfirst into that because they're always wanting to increase how much money they can make.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's end it there, Adam. Really appreciate your time, and also all our club writers sharing their thoughts from the US as well. If you are enjoying the podcast, don't forget to leave us a review or send us an email with your thoughts on the topics we discuss or what you'd like us to cover. Get in touch on tafcpod@theathletic.com. We'll be back on Monday for a deep dive into the biggest football story of the day. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.